Well, there's a sea of protesters on Parliament Hill tonight, and it continues to grow. Busloads of Tamil supporters are pouring into Ottawa.
Members of the Tamil community were out by the thousands all afternoon and into the evening. They're hoping to draw attention to the Sri Lankan government's military offensive against the Tamil Tigers. Today's demonstration was one of several in recent days in the GTA.
Dozens of people gathered in downtown Atlanta today to bring attention to what they call genocide in South Asia. The protesters say the government in Sri Lanka has launched attacks on the civilian Tamil minority. They believe those attacks have caused a humanitarian crisis that must be addressed.
Meanwhile, several thousand protesters from Australia's Tamil community have gathered in Melbourne and Sydney, calling for an end to the civil war in Sri Lanka. The noisy protesters claim that the Sri Lankan government's recent offensive against the Tamil Tigers of Eelam amounts to genocide against ethnic Tamils.
Thousands of British Tamil protesters blockaded Parliament Square to call for a ceasefire. It's day 14 of the protests.
Tamil Nadu will be up in flames and protests will continue over the treatment meted out to the Lankan Tamils by the government.
I don't know what happened to humanity. What's going on? Like, people don't care? They let this happen in Rwanda, they let this happen in Serbia, and they're going to let this happen in Sri Lanka.
And because there's no witnesses to any of this whole war has been, there's been no witnesses to any of what's going on, and that's why the world's allowed 20,000 civilians to be slaughtered, and there's still atrocities going on there. So basically,
after Britain gave independence to Sri Lanka only for the Sinhalese, not for the Tamils. This is the freedom struggle. Tamil Eelam should be free immediately.
We have made some changes. This is probably the most impact we've had throughout the whole history of the struggle. So we're getting somewhere, but it's very slow, and we need things to be changing quickly. I mean, even today, the Sri Lankan army advanced right into the safe zone in Sri Lanka, and they're using very heavy weapons on innocent civilians. So as you can imagine, we're very frustrated that not enough is being done in order to change things.
And when we ask them, why do you do that? You're one of the great powers of the world and you can't control that little island. They say, oh, we're not a superpower, we're not the US. You're not the US, you're still a great power. You had colonial influence there. You have economic ties to the country. You're one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. And we think it's about high time that they started doing something about it.
Good evening. Responding to bad news from their homeland, hundreds of Tamil protesters shut down an expressway through downtown Toronto tonight. Traffic on the elevated highway was backed up for several kilometers and caused major backups on other routes throughout the city. Hundreds of police officers were on the scene trying without success to persuade the demonstrators to leave. As the protest spread, police were forced to shut down another major highway. They said one protest spokesman vowed they would stay until they were granted a meeting with Prime Minister Stephen Harper, but police told them that would not be possible.
Very dangerous situation that they have created, and we are going to deal with it.
On it, but in one day, 2,000 people killed, 2,000 civilians killed. What are we doing to support the Tamil community? And that's all these protests are about, is saying we want people to know about this issue. If we care about human rights and justice, then what are we going to do to support the Tamil struggle in Sri Lanka?
Now, through the day today, we heard that while closing off smaller streets may be not as much of an issue as closing off the Gardner Expressway, just because of safety concerns for commuters, but also for the people that were up on the expressway. Do you feel like maybe it wasn't the safest thing to do?
Well, I think a lot of the debate is sometimes framed about whether it's safe or inconvenient, but the real issue here is that 2,000 people were killed in 24 hours, and our government has done nothing to protest that. And so what I think people are trying to do is get the attention of the wider public and put pressure on our government. And if you balance the question of inconvenience, you think about all the festivals or concerts that happen in downtown Toronto in the summer when people are inconvenienced then. This is a human rights issue where there's a new genocide underway in Sri Lanka, and all we're trying to do is to build support to say that our government needs to act. If our government claims it supports human rights, and it has to mobilize and do something to make sure that the slaughter of Tamils ends immediately. 2,000 people in one day, and there's still reports coming in that more people are being shelled. There are no safe zones, hospitals have been attacked, schools, there's nowhere for civilians to go, and the government is doing nothing about it.
silent war that's being committed without a witness, once they learn that it's a bloodbath out there, once they learn facts like 3,000 innocent civilians killed by a government that claims to protect these very civilians, once they learn such facts, they can't help but support us. And that's why you realize that yesterday, if you looked out on the Gardner, you saw support from the non-Tamil community. You had unions like the steelworkers, you had student unions out there, CFS, YFS, non-Tamil organizations in support of us. So once they learn about the issue, they're out there with us, by our side in solidarity.